Most deceitful.
The most deceitful.
Agite. Enemy. Enemy.
Enemy.
Naste.
Naste.
Is finished.
Is finished.
Kritamule.
Kritamule.
Having its roots cut off.
Having its roots cut off.
Vanaspatau.
Vanaspatau.
A tree.
A tree.
Eva.
Eva.
Like.
Like.
Shushanti.
Shushanti.
Dry up.
Dry up.
Vishnu Prava Okasaha. The demigods.
The demigods.
Translation. When the root of a tree is cut and the tree falls down, its branches and twigs automatically dry up. Similarly, when I have killed this diplomatic Vishnu, the demigods for whom Lord Vishnu is the life and soul will lose the source of their life and wither away. But he, John, to disturb or kill him. Nevertheless, sometimes the demons very much appreciate the full dependence of the demigods upon the mercy of the Lord. This is indirect glorification of the demigods by the demons. So, Tasmin gute te nashte kritamule vanaspatau vitapa iva shushanti Vishnu prana devau kasaha chakshur unmeditam yena tasmai shi gurave namaha. So, one thing that's important to understand is that in one sense, the word demon or daicha means people. There is Diti, who is the mother of all the daichas or demons, and there's also Danu, who is the mother of all the Danavas. And so generally, these are called demons. However, sometimes we find a devotee who is in the demoniac family. And can you give me an example of that? These are devotees not to be considered in terms of bodily distinction. And if you do that, then you're possessed of hellish intelligence. Actually, if you consider, it's compared to, it's like saying, oh, there's stone on the altar, or there's an idol on the altar. It's the same consciousness. So this is important to understand the difference between demons and devotees, or the good guys and the bad guys. So even you have sometimes bad guys in devotee families, or demigod families, even sometimes there's bad guys. So anyway, so I mean, even Indra acts demoniacally sometimes. Can you give me an example of that? In trouble because of that. Because Gautam Maharishi, the real Gautam Maharishi, came out, and he sort of did a operation which destroyed Indra's masculinity for some time, and then Indra had to restore it with an animal. Actually, Prabhupada even commented that when Prabhupada was on the planet, people were getting transplants from the monkeys in Vrindavan, old people. Because the old people, they, physically, they weren't able to be too lusty. So they had to take the glands from the monkeys in Vrindavan and transplant them on the old people. They were capturing the monkeys. And Prabhupada actually commented, you understand that? So, anyway, so, like demons, what is the difference? Pravatim cha, nivratim cha, that a demon is one, there's several different definitions, but the one given in the Gita is one who doesn't know what is to be done and what is not to be done. Janana vidur asura. That means who doesn't follow regulative principles like that, someone else. So these are what we call sub-religious principles. They're not actually the essence of religion. The essence of religion is sarvadharmam parityajya mamekam sharanam praja. But sub-religious principles are important to follow. I remember even when I first joined the movement, sometimes people were encouraged to violate sub-religious principles Well, one of them, of course, is thou shalt not bear false witness. You know, the Ten Commandments. Because you're a Christian, you know about these things. So we were encouraged in the name of preaching Krishna consciousness to lie. You know, there's even this statement, what is it, by hook or by crook, distribute a book. It was like a motto. But really, that's bad. And actually, Prabhupada commented on this regard. He said, you should not do this because it's like trying to catch, here's a fishing example, but the example is that, let's say if you're fishing for some big, you act demoniacally, you will be affected by the modes of nature, because the violation of these sub-religious principles brings on the lower modes of nature. Like if you lie, you cheat, you steal in the name of, you know, serving Krishna, you will be captured by the lower modes of nature. So in other words, you're acting like a demon because you're disobeying the orders of the Lord. Now, in extraordinary circumstances, quality of his disciples. So very, very important. But ultimately, what constitutes a demon, what constitutes a devotee, is someone who is, demon is someone who is against God. And nowadays, of course, the demons who are against God are not like killing their children or trying to kill their children. Of course they are, so actually, the abortion. But I mean, technically speaking, those who are taking up what's called scientism. Scientism is different than science. In order to sort of propagate their theories of atheism. These are the modern demons. And Prabhupada stressed very much the preaching to counteract the influence of the modern demons. Prabhupada was so heavy sometimes he would say, we'd kick on their face with boots. And not that that should be taken literally, but nowadays there is so much propaganda, the scientism means to understand or think that everything happened by chance. First, you know, the manifestation, they don't say creation of the universe, the manifestation of the universe, or the manifestation of life. I was just reading yesterday, they come up with a new theory that a comet landed on the Earth planet with the necessary ingredients for life, you know, some potassium. You read about this?
We went to that.
Yeah. They said actually many of these necessary ingredients weren't here on the Earth. So there was a comet that had sort of been with all these different theories. And ultimately, they talk about how life began. Darwin, of course, was the one who propagated this. He had this book, The Origin of the Species. You know, he went to the Galapagos Islands. You heard about this before?
Yeah,
Galapagos.
I'm doing it in school right now.
Oh, you're learning about that. Good.
Introduction.
It's good we're talking about this. He went on his, I believe his boat was called the Beagle, if I remember correctly. Yeah, the boat was called the Beagle. That's interesting. Is that true? It makes us. It's strange how I remember all this stupid stuff. So, what?
The finches.
Finches. Yeah, different creatures. And he was amazed, and then he thought, well, this means that they developed separately, you know, there was a different selection of the fittest, like that, survival of the fittest, etc., like that. And he came up with this theory of evolution, how different species developed. Of course, he didn't know about genetics at that particular point. He just didn't know the mechanism. But he said different species developed by, you know, selective mutation and survival of the fittest, etc., like that. So that became the accepted theory of why we're here, you know, why human beings are here, why any living entity is here. In fact, it became so accepted that there were trials in the United States, they were called the monkey trials, the Scopes trials, in which it was determined that it was illegal to teach about anything else other than, let's say, chance evolution as far as the development of the different species in life. And I'm sure it's probably like that in your public schools too. That you really can't say there's an alternative explanation, you know, creation, God, you know, planning it out. You can't say that. First problem is that it is mathematically impossible for one species to become another species, or to develop through selective, genetic mutation and survival of the fittest, etc. It's actually impossible. By impossibility, I mean that if one utilizes something called information theory, which is basically probability theory, out by my godbrother Sadaputa Prabhu. It's a very nice book on information theory. And it's impossible. It's like 10 to the minus. So in other words, that's impossible. It's like, when you study probability theory in school, one example they give is that if enough monkeys were typing on typewriters for a long enough period of time, you'd have the complete works of William Shakespeare. I'm sure you've heard about that before. So, all right, let the monkeys start today. And maybe there may be some probability in that occurring. But if we examine the structure of life, even the very simple, it is far more complex than all the cities in the world put together. I mean, one cell in your body is far more complex. I mean, and more complex than the works of William Shakespeare that the monkeys are still working on. So it's just like, and they have not come out with any example of how one species becomes another species. They can show how, by survival of the fittest, different characteristics within a species become dominant or not, or erased because of the environment became better able to survive. Because when you have a lot of pollution in the air, a lot of dust and coal dust and everything like that, then the black moths are actually camouflaged. You understand, camouflage. So their natural predators can't attack them or can't see them to attack them. So this is all that's going on. And so this is their vain attempt. And it's become so, in society, it's become so that if one actually says that there's a possibility there may be a creator or a designer, which is called intelligent design, then the person is actually kicked out of the field and can't find a job anymore if he happens to be an archaeologist, anthropologist, or any field similar. There's actually a movie about that. It's called Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. I don't know if anyone's seen that movie. Very interesting movie. It shows interviews with different archaeologists or anthropologists who posited that there was a possibility of creation, and they lost their jobs and they were blackballed from their field. Blackballed means they can never find a job again. It's like you have a black mark on your CV. Imagine that, So,
What was the book's name?
no, it's a movie.
What's the movie?
It's called Intelligence. No, it's called Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. And I can give you a copy of it. I have it in my computer. It'd be very interesting to watch that particular one. So this is demoniac. And Prabhupada considered the defeat of these particular individuals. This is, like I say, scientism, not science. We have nothing against science. We are utilizing technological stuff like the phone and the cars and all sorts of other technology to serve Krishna or even to get educated. We have nothing against that. We'll use everything like Prabhupada used whatever was available in those days. Prabhupada was on television, Prabhupada flew on a plane. So Prabhupada had nothing against technology. Varnashram culture on the farm, which practically no devotee has taken up at this particular time, unfortunately, because once they're in the city, you can't send them back to the farm. We've experienced that in Fiji, that once someone goes to Suva, they're not going to go back at a farm anymore. So Suva is filling up with people, and the farms are desolate. The land is desolate. That means there's nobody there doing farming. And Fiji is importing the major philosophy that simply by chance the universe was created, and simply by chance, not created, they say, manifest, and simply by chance life became manifest in all of its varied forms that we see today. So Prabhupada considered these particular individuals who had this atheistic propagation to be demons. And Prabhupada wanted a lot of our resources in the Krishna consciousness movement focused on defeating these demons. In fact, Prabhupada said that the Bhaktivedanta Institute, which he considered his foremost branch, or the foremost branch of the Krishna consciousness movement in defeating the demons, should have access to whatever money it needed to carry out its work. In most cases, Prabhupada was very careful about the expenditure of money. But in the case of, let's say, Swarup Damodar Goswami, who, Swami actually, Swarup Damodar Swami, he was given unlimited access to BBT funds to be able to propagate Krishna consciousness and defeat the demons. So sometimes the demons, just like I've been studying this particular demon named Richard Dawkins. Some of you may have heard of that. Of course, you know, he's a bewildered spirit soul. And most of the cases, it's interesting with these demoniac persons, they've had a bad childhood and a bad relationship with their father. You know, you really analyze them psychologically, because behind every philosophical opinion have been disabled, so they're angry with God. You know, there was one famous one, of course, that was in his wheelchair, he couldn't even speak. And then Richard Dawkins, he describes his childhood as horrendous, his relationship with his father. So they're actually projecting. We have to be careful also of not projecting our own psychology upon the realm of the absolute. And that happens. I mean, there's a lot of ladies who can't accept that God is a male. They believe in God, but he must be female, because they were abused when they were young. It's interesting how psychology really shapes your philosophical understanding of the world. So, it's good to have a good father. That way you accept that Krishna is God. Otherwise you'll think that Radharani is God. So anyway, so we should dedicate ourselves, understand this, and when the children go to school and hear this propaganda of the scientists or those who believe in scientism, the adults should be able to answer the question and provide books and even the videos and everything like that, so they can see that this is simply a philosophy that he's dedicated his whole life to challenge the understanding that God exists. Can you imagine that? That means it's demoniac. I mean, if, I could think that something doesn't exist, or let's say I don't like a particular type of car, like a Kia or something like that. But I'm not going to dedicate my whole life to just like disprove. Or I'll give you an example. One thing I don't like: Apple phones. Talking against Apple Computer Company. That means they have psychological problems. So if someone has dedicated their life, like Hiranyakashipu we see here, he definitely has psychological problems. This revenge thing is not part of a devotee's vocabulary or mentality. If, like, even in the Bible it says if someone hits you on one cheek, what do?
Slap them.
What?
You slap them.
Yes.
Punk.
No, you turn the other cheek. I mean, look at Dharma the bull. When Dharma the bull was getting attacked by the personality of Kali, did he tell Parikshit Maharaj, wipe him out, teach him a lesson? He saw God behind that particular action, and he didn't feel vengeful. A devotee is a jata shatruva. A jata shatru. A devotee has no enemy. So, we don't get into this psychological stuff. Hopefully, we don't. But anyway, the demons, they're just like Richard Dawkins. He's writing books about it. Why there's no God. And you really, philosophically, he doesn't understand philosophy. You cannot prove the existence of God using mundane logic, and you can't prove the non-existence of God using material means. Why? Because God is transcendental, he's spiritual. That's why. If you're dealing with something that you don't have the right instruments to measure or ascertain, it's hopeless. Like, you cannot prove whether they're radio waves or electromagnetic waves using a thermometer. That's stupid. Right? If I use a thermometer and say, there's no cell phone waves here. It's all illusion that there's, mobile phones here. It's stupid. You have to use a mobile phone. You have to use the right instrument. So the right instrument for ascertaining the nature of God or the existence of God, Takshi Krishna Namadi, Namavet Graham Indriya. It's not these senses or the extensions of the sense. That's all the scientists have. First of all, the senses and the extension. The scientific instruments are simply extensions of the senses in the mind. And they use this process called induction, which is actually a faulty process. Induction, like even if you were to see, let's say one species becoming another, which you haven't seen, or you saw different varieties within one species, a human being sometimes had 10 heads like Robin. That happened because of mutation. It didn't happen because of mutation. It was a design. So, if you see that, let's say even if you saw something like that, you can't, in using induction, you can't think, well, no creator. If something does happen by chance, one time, that doesn't prove all the cases. That's called induction. So, devotees should learn philosophy too, how to prove something, that, of course, that's epistemology, how do you know what you know. And on that basis, they can defeat these atheists. But you cannot prove the existence of God using mundane logic. You can show how their disproof of the attempted disproof of the existence of God is faulty. That you can do. But there's no way you can prove the existence of God. I mean, you can give some hint, like you can say there's so much order in the universe, there's certain cosmic constants. Anyone's heard about this before? Cosmic constants, like the weak and the strong, gravity and electromagnetism. You can talk, there's different constants without, if those constants were altered even to a tiny extent, everything would fall apart. There wouldn't be anything. You could say that. You could use those arguments. You could say, well, everything's happening nicely, the design, but that doesn't prove that there was a God. It doesn't prove at all. The only way to prove that there is a God is with consciousness. Uh-oh. Who's that? Govinda?
Yeah.
That's Govinda.
Yes.
Govinda, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Hare Krishna. We're just finishing up. The only way to prove the existence of God is by consciousness. And that's why Krishna says in the 9th chapter of the Gita, Prachaksha Bhagavam Dharmyam Shushukam Kartamavyam Rajaguyam Pavicham Idamuttamam. That you can have a direct experience of God by following this process of Krishna consciousness. And it's not an artificial imposition on the mind. In other words, you're not being brainwashed or convinced that you must see it. I mean, sometimes you can actually convince someone to see something that doesn't exist. I mean, you can hypnotize someone. But our process is so nice that if you follow it, utilize your consciousness, you can actually shake hands with God, see God. And we experience this. I mean, after 50 years in the Hare Krishna movement, hopefully I've experienced something. So, I'm convinced Krishna exists. I'm convinced God exists. Not because of the order of the universe, which is actually a good argument anyway, like Newton gave that order I gave that example of the solar system, how everything is going around, and how even a model could not be constructed by chance. He told that to his friend. I mean, that's not what convinces me. What convinces me is the spiritual experience that I'm having. Rajavijja, Rajaguyam, Pavicham, Idamu, Prachaksha, Bhagavam Dharmam, Shushukam, Kartam, Abhiyam. What does Shushukam mean? Happiness. One becomes happy. One is able to perceive, when you see the deities, you don't see a statue. You see Krishna. And Krishna communicates with you, and you're able to be in contact with your spiritual master who's left the planet after so many years. Not through a seance. You know what a seance is?
Yes.
What's a seance, Casey?
You've seen it in Scooby-Doo.
A seance is when these so-called psychics, they touch a table and it's real dark and the table rises
Oh, that?
and they say, your father is speaking to you, Keshav. I mean, this is all bogus stuff. They have another thing where they had turn on a radio and your parents speak to you. Who passed away, they speak to you through the radio. I mean, you can YouTube these things and see them. They're really crazy. But you actually have direct experience of Krishna consciousness by the performance of Bhakti Yoga. You know, immediate relief from all the stress, a beginning of transcendental happiness, auspiciousness, all the qualities we talked about yesterday in devotional service, isn't it? And it's the only means for controlling or attracting Krishna. So anyway, so through consciousness, consciousness is the right instrument to ascertain the existence of God. Otherwise, we can point people, we can say it's logical, it's very probable that God exists, you know, looking at the design, but it doesn't prove. That's not an absolute proof, you understand? So anyway, so the devotee should study these things, and actually study Aristotelian logic, you know, which is very important, you know. Like, you know what Aristotelian logic means? Venn diagrams? No. I'm sure you studied that.
Yeah,
You probably don't call it Aristotelian logic. Whereas Aristotle came up with the principles of logic that we use today. And of course, Aristotle learned it from India. You know, practically all these Greek philosophers, like Pythagoras, for example. You know Pythagoras? What did he come up with?
Pythagoras theorem.
Yeah. He actually learned that from India. I think it was Aryabhata or something like that in India. He learned it because he actually practiced many aspects of yoga. Maybe you didn't know that. Pythagoras was not only a mathematician who came up with the Pythagorean theory, but he actually had his own group of bhaktas, and they were vegetarians. It's interesting. And there were actually groups called the Pythagorean cults around there at that particular time. Because in Greece, Greek was right in the middle between India and the West, you know, the rest of the West. And on the trade route, so certainly they all came in contact with Indian philosophy, Indian astronomy, and everything like that. And it's also interesting to note that the first, like, Western European explorer, what was his name? I think it was Vasco da Gama. Yeah, it was Vasco da Gama, who so-called discovered India. You've heard of Vasco da Gama before? It's interesting how he discovered India. You want to hear? Very interesting. What happened is that he was afraid of crossing, you know, like the Indian Ocean to get to India. So, of course, Columbus went the other way. Columbus, you know, he thought he had discovered India, but actually he discovered America. And he was amazed that all the Indians in America were red. You know, the red Indians. They call them American Indians. Actually, they're different species within the human species. They're considered, or different race, actually, technically. But it's a different species within the 400,000 species. They're called Amerindians. Just like you have Caucasoid, Amerindians, Negroid, different species. Most people in India are Caucasoid, Caucasians. Even though the color is different in the skin, it's a Caucasian race. So anyway, getting back to our friend Vasco da Gama, he wanted to get to India, but he's afraid of crossing the sea. You know, the whole Indian Ocean there, you know. So what he was doing, he was following the coastline, and he was going down the African coastline. And what did he discover when he went down the African coastline? That there was a whole fleet of boats from India there, because they were doing trade with Africa at that point. And it was actually, they were from Gujarat. Because we all know that people from Gujarat, they're good with trade and commerce and everything like that. So the point is the people from Gujarat had discovered Europe before the Europeans got to India. Did anyone know this story before? And so what happened, there was like these giant boats that were actually, because you got to carry a lot, containers. No, they didn't have containers at that time. But there were these giant boats from India, a whole fleet of them. And the European boats were actually much smaller. It's an interesting story. I mean, it's a true story, because which you won't find in your European history books, because there's a lot of chauvinism there. So what happened is that this nice Gujarati man, he agreed to help this European Vasco da Gama go across to India. So he was accompanied, his little European boat, or boats, was accompanied by this whole fleet of Indian boats. And he discovered India in that way. You can look that up. It was really interesting. There is so much bias in the educational system, what you learn in school. Like for years, everybody was taught about this Aryan invasion of India. That the only reason people were civilized in India is because, the Europeans just invaded and married a lot of people there to get civilized. But that was propaganda, simply Western propaganda, because they were afraid of admitting or coming to the understanding, which was a shock to, I think, William James, who was an Indologist, one of the first Indologists. They were afraid of admitting that Sanskrit was more sophisticated than Greek or Latin, which it is. And they were afraid of the conclusion that they would come to by admitting it, that therefore it was a more advanced culture in India. So therefore they came up with this whole theory of the Aryan invasion. So that way, we went there, they went there. And, they were responsible for saving, as Rudyard Kipling says, the noble savages. I don't know if you know about Rudyard Kipling. No. He's famous. He wrote all these books, The White Man's Burden and everything like that. So, so there's a lot of chauvinism. So we should understand that this knowledge, the different knowledge, even of genetics and other things, was present or prominent in India thousands of years before, while the Western people were just Neanderthals, living in caves, and me Tarzan, you Jane. You ever said that? You know what I'm talking about? Of course, Tarzan was brought up by the monkeys anyway. So, while they were in Europe, where they were just trying to, figure out, language, basically. So this is important to understand, not to trust what you hear in school, as far as history is concerned. Computer programming, trust that. They're not trying to make propaganda with computer programming, C+ or whatever. It's what?
C#.
C#, okay, something new. And they're not, with mathematics, it's pretty good. Mathematics is the only pure science, actually, because everything else is speculation. And they come up with different speculations about the origin of the universe. Of course, we do accept the Big Bang Theory, because that is very much in line with Lord Vishnu breathing out, and all the universes coming out, and bang, they're all expanding. Sure. We're happy with that one. And, so many theories. Is there dark matter, dark energy? Who cares anyway? They're all in darkness, so not only the dark energy and dark matter, mostly they're in darkness. So anyway, don't trust what you hear. That's the main thing. Especially about these atheistic theories that they have. And don't become a follower of Richard Dawkins. I've been watching actually debates that he's had with some Christians, and he gets soundly defeated each time. And he still goes on, He doesn't admit, that's Kali Yuga, you don't admit defeat. That you defeated me, yes, I was wrong. Nobody does. They just go to their death. It's like the scissors and knife analogy Prabhupada gave. The two people were were arguing how did the apple or whatever fruit fall from the tree. One said the scissor, the other one said the knife, and they were punching each other over it. And finally, the guy who was, who said the knife, he was stronger than the guy with the scissors, and he just throws the guy with the scissors into the river to drown. And the guy that's drowning with the scissors wants to have the last word, and he goes down like this as he's going down. And that's how people are today. I mean, they're just like arguing. There's even this thing called the filibuster. You ever heard about that before? Where one just like defeats the other party just by talking and putting them to sleep, That's what they do. They just keep talking, so much nonsense. And even if it's nonsense, after a while, you don't have the strength to fight back with them. I've experienced that a lot, even within ISKCON. Anyway, so not with atheistic arguments, but with management, on the management scene. That someone to say, I said, all right, I give up. You're wrong, but I agree with you. It's because you become worn down so much by people who have taken too much chili peppers in their soup. So, okay, any questions or comments about these things? Yeah.
The consciousness, you said, this is the way by which we can
Ascertain, yeah.
ascertain. By that, do you mean transcendental spiritual experience?
Yeah, spiritual experience. We can have a spiritual experience that is completely different than anything we perceive with the six senses, including the mind. Yeah, and it's a real experience. It's not like a dream. And that experience is really what convinces us. Also, another thing that convinces us is seeing others who are practicing Krishna consciousness, and they are developing saintly qualities. I mean, like if you see someone like Valmiki, for example, who previously was Ratnakara, was a dacoit, and he was chanting the name of Ram, and all of a sudden, by this process, his whole consciousness changed. I mean, you can do a scientific experiment and chant anything and see if your consciousness changes. I mean, you can chant the national anthem of Australia, which I don't know. You can chant it over and over again. See if your consciousness actually changes. It won't. I mean, maybe it'll go down. But it certainly, you will not experience a change from demoniac consciousness to saintly consciousness. And look at that, Valmiki. Look at all the examples of people who followed Prabhupada or follow Prabhupada. You know, we experience that in our own lives, that real love, compassion develops. And it doesn't develop simply by chanting any old nonsense thing. You can do an experiment. Chant anything and compare it to those who chant Hare Krishna and see which one works.
I think some devotees published a paper on that.
Mm-hmm.
I think they were psychologists, and they were using the inventory of the modes of goodness.
Yes.
And that was nicely published, and p-values and...
That's a proof, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a proof right there. Of course, you'd have to have a controlled study, too. I don't know. That was a controlled study.
Yeah.
Really? Blind? Double blind?
I don't know if you could...
It's hard to be double blind with chanting. Yeah, you had to put earplugs in so you couldn't hear what they... Yeah, I mean, actually it would be impossible to do a double blind experiment with chanting. But at least from the experimenter's point of view, it could be a blind experiment.
And in Brahma Samhita says that unless we anoint ourselves, Premanjana Charita Bhakti, then we can't understand Achintya. Because Krishna is Achintya Guna Swarupa.
Yeah. Premanjana Charita Bhakti, with the salve of love of God. I mean, it's impossible. And then, it's just amazing, that you have more and more realization. And another thing Krishna says in the Gita, it's like the sun coming up in the morning, that gradually things get revealed to you. And one who has been performing Krishna consciousness for some time experiences that. I mean, I have no doubt. Of course, for the doubting soul, Shradana, Purusha, Dharmasha, Parantapa Prapyamam Nivartante, Riju Samsara Vartmani. The doubting soul will not achieve this, and he'll return to birth and death in the material world. So the way we get firm faith is by performing devotional service and serving others, how others have progressed. That really reinforces our faith. When I see my godbrothers or others performing devotional service and how they're becoming great saints. I'm not talking about how they know so many verses. That's not, to me, that's not really indicative of anything. It's how the qualities, certain Vaishnava qualities are developing. And you can read about those Vaishnava qualities, and that's how you can examine someone to see if they're making spiritual advancement. Particularly compassion. Compassion, self-control, things like that, sensory control. You see, it's, turning, as Prabhupada said, hippies into happies. Okay, good point. So anyone have any other questions? Yes.
Just a single question to prove. With normal science, there are certain things that you can prove to anyone.
Yes.
Just visibly, like let's say if I, burn a magnesium strip, I know it's going to light up, and I can show that to anyone.
But you can't prove that any magnesium strip will burn.
Yeah, true.
You can prove that the ones you utilize will burn. See, you have to accept a lot of things on faith in science. For example, you have to accept the laws of the universe are constant. Like if you're doing astrophysics, you have to understand that the same laws that apply on the Earth planet apply out there. So these are the axioms. In any system of thought, whether it be science or religion, you have to accept certain axioms, or even mathematics, you have to accept certain givens, or else you just become lost in this endless loop of trying to prove something. How do you know this? Like if you say like in mathematics or in logic, things equal to the same thing or equal to each other. A typical axiom. And how do you prove it? You can just say, that's been my experience. But you really can't prove it. You have to accept it on faith. There's a lot of things you have to accept on faith. I mean, you're accepting on faith that you're here today is a real world.
So along those lines, when it comes to Krishna consciousness...
So you can't, in other words, you can't really prove anything absolutely in this world.
Okay.
You have to, it's all based on assumptions, certain assumptions that we make that are just obviously, it's an axiom. It's something that, just you have to accept. So what's the question?
So with Krishna consciousness, even in terms of seeing how someone changes in Krishna consciousness, you can see that they develop certain qualities.
Yeah.
But often the biggest proof for someone is personal experience.
Yes.
Like let's say, like Susuka, you become.
Yeah, I mean that's why Krishna says prachaksha.
Yeah.
That means direct experience.
So when they experience spiritual happiness, which is a completely different kind of happiness than ordinary material happiness, then it's a kind of proof for them.
It's kind of proof, but then above and beyond that, there's the realization. Sometimes we get happy. Being conditioned souls, we can actually confuse spiritual happiness with material happiness. I've seen people, not that I want to criticize, go into a kirtan, and in one sense, a lot of the enjoyment they have is like a workout.
Yeah.
Isn't a workout? Really, just. Sure, they're experiencing spiritual happiness too, I hope. But, there's a certain amount of endorphins that are helping it. Like when you jog or something like that, there's a high you get from that. So we are conditioned souls, and we do have a tendency to make mistakes, be an illusion, all those nice tendencies. So, but there's a particular point where you have such a direct experience of Krishna, and it goes beyond the happiness that you experience, that you're absolutely sure that you're on the right path. Krishna is there.
Is it just a matter of someone being patient enough or determined enough to get to that stage where...
Well, I think at every stage there's some realization. Something becomes very clear to you. And the reinforcement you get actually increases as you progress in devotional service, as you take the steps. There are necessary steps. Like, yado shradata sadhu sango ta bhajana kriya. You have to deliberately take the steps. It's not simply chanting Hare Krishna. There's bhajana kriya. You have to follow the principles and rules listed by the acharyas, and then you have to really become aware of your anarthas. Anartha nivritti doesn't mean simply you just wait and one morning you've woken up and there's no more anarthas there. It means you have to work on them. I mean, why else would the acharyas list the different anarthas, like, lust, anger, greed, illusion, envy, and also even list the sources of the anarthas, like pious activities, sinful activities, offenses, and also even bhakti. These are the four sources of anarthas. Why would the acharyas do that unless it was important as far as following the process is concerned? You have the Madhurya Kandamati by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. That's why. So you have to really be introspective and work on things. And then gradually. But you have to follow the process.
Yeah, because not just for outside people looking in, but even for devotees, it can seem that because the direct experience they get or the happiness they get in Krishna consciousness is actually Krishna's he's giving
reciprocation.
You that experience. He's allowing you to experience that happiness. So even for devotees or others, it can seem kind of random. Like not any two people can be trying equally hard in Krishna consciousness.
That's right.
Yet one person can experience.
Well, it depends on the reciprocation, how
That's
much they're giving to Krishna. It's not random. It's actually very scientifically explainable, because of how much you contribute or attempt, full contribution to Brahman, and Brahman, Bhavir, Brahman, Brahmanahutam, Brahmatena Gantavyam, Brahmakarma Samadhi. As far as you contribute, as much as you contribute, then you get that reciprocation.
Right.
So you experience that when you chant good rounds, if you chant good rounds, not when. If you chant, decent rounds, attentive rounds, you experience life differently. I mean, that's a one type of proof. Then you chant inattentive rounds one day, and then your whole desires are coming up again, and you want to go stop at the ice cream shop or get a pizza or something. Isn't it? I mean, that's a direct experience. That when you're inattentive, something happens. When you're attentive, something else happens. Even insofar as our attachment to matter is concerned. Anyway, that's Krishna consciousness. So I can give you a copy of that film. It's a nice film. I have so many films. Star Wars. No, I don't have Star Wars on my computer. Okay, I think we have. What's that?
One more question. In GGG, we were doing the Vishnus, and one question we had is, what were the roles of each Vishnu?
You're talking about the Purusha avatars or what?
No, Garbhadaksha, Vishnu, Shiradaksha.
Yeah, those are the Purusha avatars.
Oh, yeah.
That's what they're called. Yeah, of course. Mahavishnu, Maha means big, great. He's lying down on the Shesha bed, and he's the one who does the Big Bang Theory. It was that yesterday I was talking about it, and someone said, "Oh, that's a TV show." So I said, "That's not what I was referring to." He's the one who just, as he's resting, it's called yoga nidra. That means the sleep of connection. Yoga means connection. So it's not really sleep. It's when Lord Vishnu lies down, his dream is the whole material world. So we're within the dream of Lord Vishnu, which is real. When I dream, it's not real. But when Lord Vishnu dreams, it is real. So anyway, so he breathes out, the universes come out from the pores of his body and also from his mouth as seed form, and then they expand. That's the Big Bang. And there's so many universes, like a bag of mustard seeds, so many mustard seeds. That's how many universes there are. And even the scientists, they talk about multi-universes, multiverses, they say, multiverses. Quantum mechanics, there's all sorts of possibilities in different universes. There's a lot of scientific stuff in which they're sort of like coming to similar conclusions to Krishna consciousness, like how consciousness affects matter. We gave that example yesterday, Krishna. None of you were there. Have you heard the example about the rice? No one heard the example about the rice. Anyway, it was a program yesterday we did. There was a study just a simple study done by one gentleman. He put rice in a rice cooker, and he cooked rice in the rice cooker. It was cooked, nice rice. He didn't eat it. He put one part of the rice in a sealed container, another part of rice in another sealed container, another part of rice in another sealed container. All rice equal sealed containers. And one container, he kept looking at it, and he said, "Love, love, love." Next container, he looked at it. You may have heard of this before.
I've heard of something similar.
Next container, usually people give the example of the water crystals, but I'm giving a different example. The other container, he was thinking, hate, hate, hate. And the third container, he was thinking, just neutral. I don't care about you. So, fast forward, 10 days, fast forward. Uncovers the containers, all equal in the beginning. First container, love container, practically the rice was almost fresh, almost good enough to eat. Not refrigerated, out there. Second container, hate, hate, hate. There was so much fungus and green goo and everything growing on it. But practically he regurgitated. So, third container was somewhere in between. So there's an instance, and you could do that experiment too, if you like.
They did it at a high school with 2 plants. One plant, they said to all the students to give it compliments,
Yeah.
and the other plant was to give it negative comments. And the plant which got all the compliments, it was quite healthy, it grew well, the leaves are bright. Whereas the one which were given negative comments, all the leaves were droopy, it was dull.
Died.
Yeah.
That's why we say people have a green thumb sometimes. So, but this experiment with rice was actually done with matter that was not alive. I mean, once you cook the rice, it ain't alive. It's just showing, so one could make the argument, well, the plant is a living entity, has some feelings and reciprocates. But with rice, you can't, cooked rice, you can't make that claim. Because here is something being affected on the molecular or, whatever level that's cannot be explained through science. Isn't it, the rice? Or, there's that whole typical thing the Japanese guy did with the water crystals. There's definitely inorganic matter. Where, they had, you heard about that one? There were water crystals, and like there was 3 containers, similar type of thing. And where there was hate, the water crystals were not organized well. And where there was love, everything was very beautiful, like snowflakes, when they looked at the molecular structure. So there's examples of how consciousness affects matter, and the scientists are actually beginning to accept that. I mean, especially in quantum mechanics, that's being talked about quite a bit. And also the uncertainty theory that when you go to measure something, you can't actually measure the act of measurement. It changes actually either the direction or the location of something. So, there's a beginning of a recognition of that. There's a force in the universe that they can't explain called consciousness. Of course, the atheists, they'll always say consciousness is what we call an epiphenomena. Phenomena. It comes from matter. But let them do it. Let them create a computer using artificial, what they call artificial intelligence. That is actually conscious. It can appear to be conscious, like, you have Siri, or I have my friend Google, which is much better. Google is actually much more intelligent. Siri is just trying to sell you things. But so, like when I want something, I can ask Google, okay, Google, what, I better not say it now because I got my phone here. And I'm trying to broadcast online. That'll be a problem. Okay, Google. what's the temperature? And I even say, you know, I've even tried it. I'd say, okay, I won't mention. Do you like me? I've tried. I have Google Home
Yeah.
at home. You know what I'm talking about? And then this girl said, yeah, I really like you. You know, I had interesting conversations.
Oh yeah,
I say,
Google told me such a hilarious one the other day.
Oh, that one.
you could actually say, okay, you know, whatever. Tell me a joke,
Yeah.
and it'll tell you a joke.
Yeah.
And you know, and I have this Google Home at home, so, and I just say, good night, and it says, good night, sleep well. So, you know, I don't need to have any association anymore. But it's not a person, it's just programmed with certain responses, because when you say something it doesn't understand, it says, you know, that's not my memory yet, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
So you can emulate, I mean, you can play chess with a computer, but it doesn't have feelings, consciousness. It can emulate consciousness. You know, it can say, ouch. There's even, many years ago, they had this program called ELIZA, which was like a psychiatrist, where you can just say, I'm not feeling well. And they say, when did that start? You know, anyway, like a psychiatrist, when did that start? Started yesterday. How was your childhood? You know, it could ask you all these questions. But it has no consciousness. I think we have to end now, because we got a full day of fun and games. Okay, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. A lot of people watching.